Now, Fatima, I remember when I was a teenager, someone's brought over a VHS copy of the miracle of Fatima, and as absolute proof that being Catholics was the true faith, because this thing had been, very well recorded. Now, if you look into it, the 3 children didn't actually see the Virgin Mary. They never said that. They said they saw a lady. It was a cultural and religious interpretation that turned it into the Virgin Mary. That's the first important thing. Now, the other amazing thing about this, they were all told to gather at a certain date, and up to 100,000, some numbers reckon, were there, including many professors and large numbers of the Communist Party of Portugal who were coming along to make fun of the pilgrims. And right on cue, the sun fell out of the sky. It's been photographed, talked about, written about by these academics that were here, and then the sun began to dance over the people's heads in Fatima. People fell to their knees, communists instantly converted to Catholics, and it was just the most remarkable thing. The local Freemasons, I thought they were called administrators down there, are called Freemasons, wrote about this thing actually happened, and these are photographs of the event taking place. And it's always been attributed to, well, the Virgin Mary came. The Virgin Mary arrived in Portugal. But what you'd have to do then is look at the backstory. And if anyone's Catholic here, I don't mean to offend your faith or anything like that. I'm not here to do anything like that. I'm just telling you, I'm looking at the backstory. So as I said before, it's not the object in the sky that interests me. It's the experience on the ground that created it, in my opinion. Portugal was in tremendous social and political turmoil at the time. There was a great fear of a communist overthrow, the Communist Party, because this is mainly because of troubles within their colonies in Africa. It was also bang in the middle of World War I. You had everything wrong in the socially, everything wrong culturally. Something was going to break, and there was going to be a crack in the collective society on a psychic level. And the results was this: the sun dancing in the sky. This has never been debunked by anyone, because it's just, you have professors from universities giving very complex descriptions from different parts of the crowd of exactly the phenomena that took place. They all witnessed it. Here's another one. Over the years, I've looked at a lot of UFO footage, and I just wrote it all off as either a military experiment, some kind of strange aircraft, or just something we don't know yet, like literal. But I never thought of it as an alien until I saw this footage of very famous lights passing over Washington, D.C. in July 1952. The remarks about this, the reports about this in the US government are quite remarkable to read them. These things were zooming over the Pentagon, flying around, and the Russians, even after perestroika and they opened up their files, said it was never us. We didn't have that kind of technology, and neither did the Americans, to have these lights flying in formation all around Washington, D.C. Again, we look at the backstory. This was right bang in the middle of the Cold War, when it looked like the world was very, very close to annihilation. There was intense UFO activity over Washington, D.C. between July 19th and August 3rd. April 23rd, before that, a massive nuclear detonation took place in the Nevada desert. It was a H-bomb, the biggest one to date. It was an atomic bomb. It was the largest atomic bomb ever detonated. Then up in June, long before this, the US nuclear submarine, the Nautilus, begins construction, so now they're building nuclear submarines with nuclear weapons in them. And then on November 1st, Operation Ivy, which was going on at the time these lights were appearing, were planning to successfully, and they did, successfully detonate the first hydrogen bomb. So you're talking about Washington, D.C. at that time as a place that has it's like a psychic maelstrom. These guys are literally planning the end of the world. They're building weapons that can destroy the human race. There's all kinds of neuroses, guilt. There would have been people who would have been religious, would have been looking at the moral implications of that. It was just so terrifying. And if you read the books of what it was like to work in the US government at those times, it really was terrifying. These people really thought that they were going to destroy the earth. And I'm saying, were these tulpas, just like at Fatima, a projection of the tortured consciousness of the US government? Because a lot of this stuff was going on in secret and they couldn't even tell their own families about it. Betty and Barney Hill. As soon as I first read about this case, I was suspicious. It just seemed, there was a very, very famous alien, probably the very first famous alien abduction case. I don't mean suspicious that I think they're liars or anything. I think these two people were absolutely sincere human beings who are telling the truth. Betty and Barney Hill were an American couple who claimed to have been abducted by an extraterrestrial in rural portion of New Hampshire, September 19th to the 20th, 1961. They were an interracial couple at the height of the civil rights movement. Very stressful. Now, they said later on that there was no problems within their family, but you could not live in the United States in the 60s, the time of Watts and the Black Panthers and the Nation of Islam, and not be affected by being a interracial couple, because that would have been very deeply embedded within their consciousness. And this may have been, this alien abduction experience, not to denigrate their experience, they very well could have been abducted by an alien. I'm just saying, this is what I'm just putting this out there for speculation, that it was brought about by deep psychological trauma caused by their interracial difficulties in society. Now, they have maybe been okay in their family, but I lived in New York in the 1980s, and I had a black girlfriend at one time, and even then, we used to get funny looks walking down the street. Or maybe it was just me, but it was just, you could sense it, that it must have been really bad back then. Another one, very interesting, same period, white sheriffs in the South reporting a cigar-shaped object. To me, that was instantly a Freudian thing. This was a fear of their sexuality being undermined by, you see, if you look at a lot of fears that they had in the Deep South among the structure, it was about, or even at the local level, it was about the sexuality of African Americans moving in on white women. This is powerful. So that was its hope, but caused by their sexual insecurity of being threatened at the idea of blacks suddenly having the same social and economic power as some redneck sheriff in Oklahoma or in Alabama somewhere. Now, here's another one. I'm not going to go too deeply into this because John Lash has done some fantastic work on this. The description of the ET is in nearly all credible cases. I'm talking about the ones where people, there's one way you can tell someone is telling the truth that they had this experience is they're not happy. They have the same post-traumatic stress injury as someone who's been raped, or a concentration camp survivor, or someone who's been kidnapped. They don't go to the spaceship and say, I saw beings of light and golden crystal unicorns. They come back in a very bad psychological state that never leaves them. And they're the credible ones, because if you're that much damaged, you're telling the truth about something has happened to you. And they're very similar. I suggest everyone read John Lash's Not in His Image book. It's really pretty amazing, actually. And it's changed my opinion about the supernatural and the paranormal. He deciphered the Nag Hammadi texts, which were Gnostic texts that were discovered in 1947, the same year as the Dead Sea Scrolls. And these are valuable documents because they're pre-Cathars, they're pre-Vatican intrusion. This is the text of what the Gnostics were talking about. And they talked about an individual called an Archon. An Archon is a sort of a non-organic being that exists outside our perception. That's, in terms of how they look, they describe them what we would call the classic grey alien. They also, on some level, and John Lash has speculated on this too, and I'm not averse to it either, that they're somehow interfaced into the psychopathic aspect. There seems to be a sort of commonality. Are they a kind of a spiritual archetype of the psychopath? But it's very interesting stuff when you start looking into it. And the experience is identical to centuries-old reports of demons, jinns, succubi, other encounters with non-human life form, with personal and collective stress being a common underlying factor. They just don't seem to happen to happy people. They seem to happen where there's a lot of problems. And that to me is that's a big factor we have to start looking at. Okay, this presentation today, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I wanted to throw this in because people are very confused about the Illuminati. They throw this word out there, the Illuminati this, the Illuminati that. The Illuminati don't exist anymore. Not officially, I don't know what they're called. They're probably just a bank or something today, or corporations. But there's two versions of this Illuminati thing. There was the first original Illuminati. Now, no one knows if they actually existed or not. They were more like a legend or something like that. They were believed to be the Gnostics who weren't killed. And they held within them the pre-Christian, pre-Catholic understanding of Christianity, and they were the guardians of Hermeticism. So they were believed to have these special powers. That was a common thing. And people would talk about them in this kind of language, a secret group that had special powers. They were almost seen like a wizard kind of group. They were definitely active in Italy, and they were active in Spain, which makes sense because of the Cathars. They seem to have disappeared at some point. they just weren't talked about in those words. And then this guy came along called Weishaupt, and he founded the Bavarian Illuminati to try and co-opt their legacy. But that was really a political system to transfer royalty and royal type, monarchist type systems over to republican governments, because countries could no longer compete with maritime and large corporations like the Hudson Bay Company and the East India Company and those kinds of large seafaring maritime organizations. So that was really, he just co-opted the term and the word Illuminati. And if you get old books, particularly ones that were written before 1890, before they were censored by the Carnegie Foundation, you'll see them openly talking about this. And the thing was that they infiltrated the Masonic laws, particularly the Grand Orient Lodge in Paris, and then they moved a political system into that. That's how the Masons became politicized. But anyway, the idea was that they were the survivors of the Gnostic and Cathar genocide, which believed the truth about the Jehovah God. I'm going to tell you what they used to believe, but in a later slide. The term has been NLP'd by the psychopathic control grid to associate the term Illuminati with the frauds who co-opted the term. So anytime you hear the term Illuminati, remember it's two meanings to it. One is pretty good. One is it's not completely evil. They were just businessmen. But they did evil things like start wars and stuff like that. But it's not as black and white as people think it is. And this is what I'm talking about here. This is very strange stuff. The Gnostics believed that the God of the Bible is an imposter, and so did the Cathars. Now, there is a God, okay? They say there is a God, but there's this entity called Jehovah is not him. This is my copy of the Jehovah Witness Bible. I'm not a Jehovah Witness myself, but I collect different Bibles, kind of compare them. It's a bad quality slide, but this is the first page of Genesis, and it talks about God did this, and God, he separated the firmament and all that stuff. And then out of the blue down here, this thing called Jehovah God shows up right before the creation of man. Who? Who is Jehovah God? And the idea was that this thing had co-opted the Bible. John Lash goes into this as well, and basically stole the legacy of God. And the Cathars believed it was basically, to describe it, would be like a psychopathic demon. And it appears in Genesis out of the blue, just here. This Jehovah God thing. And it seems to have originated at the Council of Nicaea, because there's not much record of it being a very old word. And now this graphic is amazing. This is the sign of benediction that you'll often see popes and stuff doing it, and you'll often see religious statues like the Child of Prague doing it. It's sort of like, it's almost like the Boy Scout thing. And on this side, this is the benediction. It's almost like it means, a good blessing upon you. But when you cast a light upon it, you get this demon on a wall. It's like a shadow puppet. And that's called a malediction. And this was a secret code used by alchemists to show that Christianity, although it portrays itself as a benediction, the word of God, its reality is it's hiding Jehovah, this dude here, behind their Bibles. Very interesting stuff. Another one. The Federal Reserve, we all know about that. When it was created, the transfer of a production-based economy to fractional lending-based economy, which resulted in engineering of a global war. I have absolutely no doubt that World War I was a result of this Federal Reserve Act. For starters, all the main economy of the world had been shut down, had been turned into a paper economy, and it's been transferred to the United States. Essentially, that's why all these European bankers moved over, and you were going to have massive unemployment in Europe because there simply the industries would collapse. And what's a great way of dealing with the unemployment? Start a war. And they had all these cushy alliances set up. The Ottomans, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Germans, British, Russians, that the whole thing was all ready to go. And then you had World War I, which is a horrific disaster for European society. We still haven't recovered from it. And the seeds were set in February 3rd, 1914, with the 16th Amendment of the United States Constitution authorizing the federal government to impose and collect income taxes. On February 9th, it's reported in the New York Times and many American newspapers that a chain of slow, large meteors moving from northwest to southwest is sighted over North America. Anyone who has even the most basic understanding of astronomy knows that meteors don't move like this. They move like this. So there's no such thing as a slow-moving meteor. Again, lights in the sky at a time of psychological and emotional, cultural and political crisis, the biggest one of all to date. And when in days of this happening, the factors leading to the great cull of the World War I and the Soviet Revolution began. There seems to be an element too that these things also manifest on the cusp of these horrors. Now, we're always forced to confront the basic core truths about ourselves as people and our place in the world. We're always trying to resolve both poles of cognitive functioning between our subconscious and our consciousness. Our living world is directly interfaced with the world of our dreams, symbols, archetypes, and metaphors. I do tarot readings, but I don't do divination. I do tarot simply because I find it a fantastic psychoanalysis method to deal with problems, even simple problems. Because they're pictures, they allow you to work through the problem differently. And there's a woman near where I live, she was constantly obsessed with the Ace of Wands card. This is the Italian classic deck, which I use. And she kept talking about it and going on about it, and I knew there was something to that. And my assumption was she'd been assaulted or something, she'd been beaten up with a stick or something like that. And it turned out, eventually she told me that she had been date raped in college. And it wasn't until she confronted the trauma and the Ace of Wands representing the phallus and the sexual assault of the guy who got her drunk, put a date rape drug into her drink, and took advantage of her, that she was able to move on. She had resolved both poles of cognitive functioning. And that's the purpose of children's fairy tales. We all think children's fairy tales are just, they're sweet and everything. They're actually very dark. You look at Jack and the Beanstalk. That's about a guy sneaking into a couple's house, makes friends with their wife in order to murder their husband. And they're all very, very dark like this. And that the purpose of them is to cultivate the shadow within children. So when they grow up, they don't grow up with an airy-fairy understanding of the world. They have to know that the world is full of human predators. You'll often see the psychopaths are all over them. They're in the shape of wolves or evil ladies who eat children and stuff like that.